Morena Council, I will begin with our karakia. E ara e tama nui te rā, whiti mai I ruka, whiti mai I raro, kia piha te te, kia wana te ti, kia rito te ti, kia tauma te Māori, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora. My name is Vinci. I am working on the LTP. This is for anybody who may be video conferencing in online or watching this live. Today we are actually talking about the revenue and finance policy and looking at some activity funding analysis on the various activities. And what I'd like to do is go around the room, welcome councillors, and please introduce yourselves to any of our online viewers. Thank you.
Good morning, me and Nigel, and we've got apologies from Councillor Booth who's away, Councillor Jackson for lateness, and Councillor Piddington at this stage as well.
Good morning, Councillor Michelle Pye.
Good morning, Councillor Scott Shannon.
Good morning, Stacey Scott.
Good morning, Councillor Burt.
Kia ora, Councillor Sally Parker.
Morena councillors, and I believe Councillor Oliver had a night shift, so he may teams in a little bit later. Okay, so I have sent part of this PowerPoint presentation out to you, the first half, where we were actually looking at the backgrounds and the basics. You've also had a video that explains some of this, but I'm just going to quickly go through it. And as requested by Councillor Shannon, I have also condensed this into a one-page summary for you, which I will hand out a bit later, so you have an imprinted copy that you can refer to from time to time. Okay. So we've gone through what the legal obligations are, but basically this is where accountability and transparency for your community comes first and foremost, where we actually explain exactly how we expect to pay for all the activities, and we look at it through a lens of equity and fairness. We do consult on this. It must be consulted. It doesn't need a full special consultative procedure, but we do it in conjunction with the LTP, as it is a part of the LTP. So it does go through the full SCP process, which means people can make submissions and ask to speak to them in the hearing process if they so wish. Okay. It's reviewed every 3 years, so as you know, our suite of LTP policies that are reviewed every 3 years, which means you can actually ensure they're very up-to-date and very much current with legislation and best practices around the council. Okay. So we talk about what the rating framework is. We talk about the funding sources available. We look at OPEX and CAPEX, how you fund depreciation, and then we get to the nitty-gritty as to how you fund the activities. And I've got a spreadsheet that I will refer to from time to time, particularly when we're looking at infrastructure and some of the more complex projects, of where all your funding revenue comes from and how much based on the former year. Okay? What's really important is that we look at something called the two-step funding process. So the first thing we need to do is think in the big picture, what are the objectives you are trying to achieve with this particular activity, and how is funding it going to help you achieve those objectives? Who are the parties benefiting from this? When is it that they're benefiting from it? Is it just an immediate benefit? Is it a long-term benefit? Who created the need for this particular activity or service? That's what we mean by we talk about exacerbators, okay? Why is it that you need it? And what are the costs and what are the benefits if you fund it separately, this activity, from, say, another activity? So you consider all of those at the beginning, and then you say, what impacts would any of those things have on the community? Okay, so that just helps to give that strategic overview for everything that we consider today and in the next few weeks. So we've talked about the rating framework. You're very familiar with these, the types of rates, general rates and targeted rates. Here in Timaru, we use land value for our district-wide rates. You can also use capital value. When you do your rating review next year, this will probably come up as to which you prefer. We talk about differentials, which is based on the different categories of rateable land, and then we have something we call the UAGC, which means it's the same amount no matter what the value of the land holding or the property is. Same amount for everybody. Then we have targeted rates, which again are land value based, and they can also be UAGC or UAC based. So everybody in a set area would get the same amount. For instance, like Temuka, if it was for the local pool. All targeted rates have to consider these particular things in Schedule 2, where we talk about the use of the land, what kind of discretionary activities are allowed on it. And then we talk about what the land area is, the location, the value of the land, the capital value, land value, and the availability of council services. So it's really important that we actually talk about the benefit can also mean the potential benefit. So somebody has the ability to connect to the services. Whether they connect or not, they still have the benefit of having those services there. So quite often in some councils, they charge half rates or quarter rates if somebody has the potential to go onto a particular system, but they choose not to, they still get charged for that service being available.
Lindsay, do you think, just for the councillors, would it be helpful if we gave some examples of what the UAGC is, what it funds, what a targeted rate is, what it funds and so on, or are you comfortable? Like water is a targeted rate, and so that's across everybody at, looking at Mr Dixon, is it, how much is the water? Is it about $425, for instance? That's a targeted rate that sits to everybody. Is there any... Everybody who's connected. That's right, yes, who's connected. So are you comfortable? Do you want us to, because you see that? And I would just add that the debate between land value and capital value is an interesting one. The Productivity Commission does recommend that land value is a more pure rate because it doesn't distort the use of the land based on rates. Now, you might think that doesn't, how does that affect? Well, if you're a householder, probably not a lot, but if you're Meridian or a generator with great big dams, then there is a very different debate for you between land value and capital value, obviously.
We have talked before about other funding sources that the council has. We call these like your levers that you can use for potential income streams. So we have fees and charges, obviously. You also have your interest and dividends from any investments that you make, borrowing, which is what we use largely for the CapEx, asset sales, any proceeds from asset sales, development contributions or environmental contributions. They used to be called financial contributions, but the last bit of legislation that passed just before Parliament rose, they are now called environmental contributions in the legislation. We have grants and subsidies, and then we have other sources of income, which can be things like bequests or lump sum contributions, all types of things. So when we're funding OPEX, there are rules we have to follow as what can actually be used. Fees and charges can be used to fund OPEX. Your interest, borrowing, although we do say, sorry. For day-to-day costs for these things, we can only use general rates, targeted rates, fees and charges, interest and dividends, grants and subsidies, and other operating revenue. You can't sell assets in order to actually fund OPEX. So the way I say it is you can't sell the family silver to pay for the help. Okay, so borrowing is not normal for OPEX, but it does happen by exception. The risk for that is sometimes you can increase your risk of breaching your balanced budget requirements and also whatever your borrowing cap can be. So I believe in most councils that if you do borrow for OPEX, it's usually a decision that's brought to council at that time. Okay, so for capital expenditure, you have a bit more freedom as to the sources of income. These are obviously for your big budget items, and that also includes the district plan because that is such a big project that you do once every 10 to 20 years. That is something that you actually borrow for. You have lump sum contributions where somebody can actually just make a contribution, for instance, if it was a developer or a particular party or an industry, they can make a lump sum contribution for, to go towards the infrastructure or the provision of some of the community facilities. You have your reserve funds. It's very clear in the legislation. You can only use the reserve funds for the purpose in which they were actually put in place. So development contributions, which we've had that discussion, and there should be a paper coming to you to talk about development contributions versus environmental contributions. You can also get those contributions from external parties, which we rely on a lot, particularly for our roading and footpaths. Waka Kotahi funding is a prime example, and the MFE funding, particularly when we look at waste minimization. Depreciation, we obviously use that for our CapEx. Asset sales, this is where you can sell the family silver to actually help pay for your big budget items. If you have any surpluses from your OPEX, if you get more in your fees and charges or you collect more rates, you can reallocate those funds to help pay for CapEx. And then, of course, we have bequests. Now, we don't tend to get many of those, but your facilities that do tend to be things like your libraries. They will get bequests from benefactors will actually put in their will that they wish the library to have some income as a legacy project. Okay, and then when we talked about funding depreciation, that's just basically your insurance cushion to make sure that you have the funds to pay for repairs, renewals, replacements, and it's just covering your deterioration of your assets over time. Mr. Dixon actually pointed out to you that because councils really were not required to fund depreciation until like the 1990s, it was after the 1989 amalgamation of councils, I believe, when the new amalgamation happened. So every council in the country has underfunded depreciation over decades. It's very common. Timaru has done a lot to actually try to catch up, but we're in the same boat as everybody else that we haven't really fully funded for the number of assets and the age of the assets that we have. The reason why we try to fund for depreciation is so that we reduce the borrowing. So to leave you more headroom for the projects you really need it for, or in case of emergencies. Now, we have moved to using valuations as our basis to calculate depreciation, which has actually helped in recent years. It does mean that it has incurred a higher rate charge because we use that new value.
Yeah, question. Can we understand somehow, it's probably slightly technical, but how much room across the different parts of council, such as vertical and horizontal, we are underfunding? So in theory, Three Waters is an easy one.
Yeah.
You know, what room, what's our depreciation headroom? And that partly goes to those questions. I know you're going to come back with answers, but it's that opportunity to increase those depreciation funds for projects in that space.
Certain activities.
Yeah.
Yes, so we did discuss, the mayor has actually sent in a request via email for some more detail around some of the financial figures, particularly looking at what are the debt levels against particular activities, so that we can also look at what's the depreciation levels for those particular activities as well, particularly with the assets, and looking at what our debt headroom is for various things. There were a number of other questions in there. We discussed it yesterday in a Teams meeting, divvying out. We're working on the financials today to actually give to SLT, and they are going to be reviewing some things because, as you well know, a lot of councils, every LTP, projects are put into year 4. Your year 4 projects for your CapEx, which would be year 1 for your LTP, probably total just over $100 million of CapEx spend for that year alone. Then on top of that, you have your BAU of what we need to do in roading, and then, of course, water. So we need to actually look and give you guys some options as to what you can do to help smooth that out, because it's probably not realistic that you could do $150 million worth of CapEx in 1 year. And, you know, all those projects are not mutually exclusive, but when you look at your big budget items, you've got the Theatre Royal, you've got the microfiltration plant, you have got the stadium. You know, there's some big ticket items, and they were all kind of put into year 4 and deferred. And every council does that so that the next council can actually review, look at it, gauge what's happening in the environment. In the case of the stadium, you know, some of those works have been deferred, which is why they're hitting now. And it may be that you guys opt to actually spread out the work in phases over a few years, which will help to smooth out that spend. Okay.
And so one of the things I'm trying to understand is the likes of maybe a major water project in year 3, if we have depreciation deficit, we can actually effectively start funding that project or the projects in general because we have that deficit in the depreciation, because otherwise effectively we can't loan or fund it until we actually do the work. But if we have room or a deficit in depreciation, then it means actually we could, you know, effectively target money for those projects in general. I'm not sure if that's an exact science.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways, and so around water, and this is the whole, really the philosophy that underlied moving from the deemed cost, where council sat for a long time, to the fair value, particularly in water and roading, where there are really big depreciation numbers because you've got big asset values. And so this is where moving all of your assets to a fair value, and it's a significant exercise, will actually give you much better into the true depreciation cost that council is incurring. To the point Vincey's made, there's probably been an undercooking of this by many councils for a variety of reasons, and eventually the sort of the hounds of time catch up with the depreciation hairs. And what you've got in order to get there, Your Worship, is actually to work through and get fair values on everything, and that will be a big exercise in your property areas. And that will give a true value then of the amount of depreciation that should be getting rated, and I expect it will be a number materially bigger than what it is. But you have now at least got your big ones in there in terms of water and roading. And if you go back to, was it about 2019, Andrew? Depreciation was sort of in the order, I think, of about 16 to 18 million, and it's doubled. And that is reflecting that move. So to answer your question, getting a really good understanding of your assets, their conditions, and the useful life of them will give you an understanding of the depreciation and therefore the amount to fund. And that's, I think, part of the exercise that needs significant resourcing and investment in this next 3-year period. I don't think that there's any, and as you come to it and you look at it in terms of the funding mechanisms, you think about fees and charges, and you think about, for instance, the importance of a filtration treatment plant, why it wouldn't also be for you to consider, whether you land there or not, increasing, for argument's sake, the volumetric charging on water. Now that becomes a debate about how you balance the rate where everybody pays as opposed to balancing a fair charge on those who are using the water, but of course what is the quid pro quo in terms of economic activity and benefit from those water users. And that's really what you're trying to tease through here. This is the conceptual part. Soon you'll have some numbers to then go and weigh where you balance, but you can, that's what is seen by having a range of those mechanisms.
Sorry. So we get now to the activity funding analysis, and this is where we're actually going to start looking at various activities, and I'm probably about 3/4 of the way through where I've broken it down into percentages as to how much is going from fees and charges and how much from rates. Haven't quite gotten through all of them, so I'll be pulling up a spreadsheet and we'll be whipping out the calculators. And I know a few people here who are very sharp with calculators. Your worship, I hope you brought yours. And we can actually go through those so you can have those discussions as to how you want to tweak and look at the ratio. Keeping in mind, today is about setting the scene. It's not about making decisions. It's just so that you can actually consider the options. And you give us some direction, and we will come back to you with a paper to actually help you, guide you through that and make recommendations based on your desires as to which way you want to go. That will be part of the revenue and finance policy adoption for consultation. And that's where you get into the decisions that we want X here and X from there. Does that make sense? Okay, thank you. Right, so for activity funding analysis, it sounds very fancy, but it's really common sense and the application of it. It is how do we measure the benefits and who gets the benefits, for how long, why the need is there, who created the need, all of those type of things that I talked about when I talked about the two-step funding process. So the first thing that you look at is it of a private benefit, or is it to a group, or is it for the whole of the community, or is it for the wider region or nationally? Okay, and roads were a really good example of that. We do a lot of work on the roads, but a lot more people outside of Timaru get those benefits and create some of the damage. Okay, so private benefit, the obvious thing there is your fees and charges are really set up for your private benefit. That's a pure user pays type of scheme. Then we have the targeted rates that Bede and Andrew just spoke about for the water schemes, which a particular group gets that benefit of those. Then you have your community-wide ones, and that's where your UAGC comes into play a lot. And for an example, some of your community facilities are a community-wide benefit, so there's a UAGC charge just about all of those, okay? Then you actually look at whether or not the benefit is just for a year. If it is, then you use your rates. If it's for multiple years, and that's in the case for most of your CapEx projects, that's why you use borrowing or reserves to actually fund those. Okay. Then we go into looking at the negative effects, and that's where we get into the exacerbator situation as to who's creating the need for this activity in the first place. A lot of the times, like when we're looking at environmental services, it's really about controlling those negative effects. So your dog control, your district planning, resource consenting, your parking enforcement, your building control, all of those things, that's about mitigating problems and making sure that we're keeping everybody in line with the legislation, and we're protecting the environment and people. The fees and charges we also use, and general and UAGC rates we use to control negative effects. That's the funding mechanisms for those activities. Then we talk about the distinct funding. So a particular activity will be ring-fenced, and you actually make it really clear what the true costs of running that activity is to the community. And then we look at, is it benefiting the people or is it benefiting the property, okay? If it's the property, and that's when we talk about land value based, so which is the basis of a lot of your valuations. And then if you're using your people benefits, that's where you use your universal annual general charges or your universal annual charges. Okay? Keep in mind, benefit analysis is not an exact science because we're actually talking about a subjective view on these things based on your experiences, your constituency, and what's happening for the areas you represent. Which is why when it comes time to actually looking at these activities, we encourage you to put forth your best views that you can surmise representing your constituency. However, as a council, you do need to come to a consensus for those things, okay?
Excuse me, is it possible just to give us maybe an example of distinct funding? I didn't quite get that.
So a distinct funding, an example would be like a targeted rate for a swimming pool in a specific area that that community is funding that, therefore, and only them, okay? That would be an example, or a targeted rate for anything where you're actually covering the whole cost of that activity, and those people that created the need for it are paying for it. Yeah, whole rates, but you also have whole fees and charges. But like a community who decides that they actually want to reestablish a hall or refurbish it or something, and we may carry out that CapEx, but charge them the targeted rate for that. Okay? Any other questions around that? Okay. Where am I at? Okay. Then when we talk about the community impact, you need to actually look at, is it helping you achieve those community outcomes that we had discussed earlier? We're going to have another discussion about the strategic priorities you determine from those community outcomes, because we need to actually make sure that when you're discussing the various projects and the different proposals coming up to you for funding decisions, do they actually align to the priorities that you've determined you wanted for this LTP? Fairness and equity. Now, we need to ensure that we're not talking equality. It's not about treating everybody the same. It is about acknowledging people have different starting points or different needs, and are you being fair and equitable to address all the different people within your community? And then, of course, the big thing for you guys, affordability, okay? And making sure that rates are inevitable. They're taxed, just like taxes, but you do have some levers that you can use to help control the impact on ratepayers so that you're not always looking at rating as the funding of first resort. And using various levers. But there's always going to be rates. And fortunately, in these modern times, there's always going to be rate increases because of rising costs and rising demand. Then we actually look at the practicality of the funding and the particular activity. You like to allow for a little bit of variation for other funding sources so that you're not just resorting to the two rates and fees and charges. You'd like to actually see, can you get alternative funding? Can you do partnerships? Are there grants and subsidies you can access? Those type of things. And then you have to consider, is it really practical to charge per benefit analysis? Because it may be that somebody may benefit a lot more, but they may not have the ways and means to do it. So then maybe you actually look at, it could be a universal charge for the whole community, because if you're helping a particular sector, and an example of that would be if you did something to support older persons' activity schemes or exercise schemes, or an over 50s gym or something like that. Of course, there would be user pays, but you may have some people or school groups that access the gyms. Rather than having the schools pay the full cost, you could see that would be a benefit to the wider district, that young people are actually getting into your facilities. So there may be a component of that particular activity that is paid for through UAGC rates, okay? Right, now for getting down to the nitty-gritty bit when we start to actually look at some of these activities. For all of these activities, we need to think first and foremost about the community well-being outcome it contributes to the most, in your view. Whether or not the benefits are to the whole community or to just a select group or to individuals, when and how long those benefits will be, if it's needed because of somebody's actions or inactions, if it's funded from other activities, do the costs and benefits meet the criteria for transparency and accountability? That means, is it truly reflective of the real cost of running that activity? And then you think about the four well-beings for the cost to ratepayers, of course. So our LTP groups are based on the types of services the community gets, and we kind of lump them together in an overarching umbrella. They do not match the organizational structure, so it gets confusing because some of the activities that may come to your committees, which are based on a lot on your organizational structure, may not match what you see in the LTP. And I have an explanation of that when I give you the one-page handout. So this will be what your community sees that you deliver. But they will not know what commercial and strategy means, which is the name of your inside organizational group. But they deliver particular services to the community. So we have community services and governance and rec and leisure, district planning, sewer, stormwater, land transport, sorry. We don't want to transplant our land anywhere, no. It's, yeah, we'll start charging Ashburton, okay. Waste minimization and then water supply. And then we have some other sundry activities, particularly like when we look at council housing and properties, things like that. Okay, and then when we look at our activities, So there's a number of activities, but these are the ones that are the public-facing activities. We have a lot more activities in-house, which we call our corporate support activities, and they are the kind of like the back house stuff that keeps the machine running so that council can deliver on these things to the community. Very common amongst councils all across the country, and some of these, of course, you're legislatively mandated, you must provide. Others are some that you choose to provide because of the benefit to your community, for example, the airport. Okay. We've gone over those activities. We have consolidated a few. We have put public amenities like your campgrounds, fishing huts, the toilets, and your halls and memorial halls and community halls together under the one activity management plan. They're not huge money earners, but they provide a service for the community, and they're managed by the same manager. So it just made sense to consolidate them, and they sit under our property portfolio. It is called social housing, but what you provide is not true social housing because it's really designated for a set demographic, and it's by exception that you accept people who fall out of that criteria. So we're going to rename that council housing, which is more reflective of what you actually provide. One of the things, what we have to remember about rates, they're a council tax, inevitable. You can't avoid them. Some people can avoid income tax, people can't avoid rates. Rates based on capital value use property value as a proxy for wealth, which meant the higher the property value, the higher the rate. You guys choose to use land value, so that doesn't always marry up. And as the chief executive specified earlier, particularly when you're looking at big industrial lots, there may be some merit in looking at different alternatives for that. There's no sign that our revenue sources are going to change anytime soon. We haven't had that magic bucket of money from, well, we're waiting for the new government to form. But if there is a magic bucket of money, particularly for Three Waters, we would welcome it with open arms. But at this point in time, we're actually saying we've only got what we've got right now. And so maybe we need to think about how we can be cleverer with accessing some of that funding. Sometimes there is a bit of a tenuous link between a benefit and a rates liability. And an example of that was when I talked about having the potential benefit. Some homeowners may argue, but I'm not hooked onto your system. Why do I actually pay for it? Because I don't really benefit. And we're like, but you could benefit from it. You choose not to. We're still providing that, and you may want to in future. So the ultimate decision on how rates are imposed are by you. That is totally your choice as to what you do. Offices will provide you the best advice that they have, but it absolutely is up to you. We also apply penalties for unpaid rates, but I happen to sit adjacent to the rates officers, and I know that they're very empathetic and they work a lot with community members to enable and help people to be able to pay their rates and pay them on time, pay them overtime. So this council does very well as far as its rate debts. Okay, rates being a tax, it was recognized in legislation. So there was a Court of Appeal, Woolworths and others versus the Wellington City Council, and the judgment came through that it was very clearly a form of taxation. So you have a very solid basis on which to impose your rates and call it a council tax if you wish. Okay. Fees and charges. Right. So The legislation, particularly the stuff that just got passed recently, it says you can actually charge fees to recover the costs of providing services. Some are set in statute, which means you can't adjust the amount of them, alcohol licensing, regulatory ones. Section 150, 150 says that it should only be a reasonable cost of providing the service, so you can't charge like a wounded bull. Okay? You actually have to be fair. And you can't put a fee onto somebody for something that's of a community-wide benefit. You need to actually include your overheads. That's an acceptable cost. And sometimes that's a bit tricky to actually assess accurately, so we do the best estimations that we can when we provide you with the information. But it's really hard to do that at a single transaction level, so we tend to do it more at the higher level. The cost to actually do the policies and stuff like that, that's not included in your cost recovery, okay? That's kind of like an overhead that comes from general rates. So now let's get down to your activities. Here's an example. This was a wee table that I created, and I am going to give you guys a printed handout of all of the activities in this format of a table that just basically tells you how much is attributed to your UAGC, how much is attributed to your general rate, how much goes to a targeted rate, how much goes to grants and subsidies, and how much goes to fees and charges. If the box Other is ticked, it's usually because it's either from interest, from dividends, or something like that. And if there's a tick and it says, like to grants and subsidies or fees and charges, it means there's the potential to have those, but they don't have an income stream identified as of yet. Does that make sense? Okay. So if I give you an example on looking at the first one, when we look at the airport, unfortunately, it's played with my formatting a bit. So when we're looking at the rates, in blue, what I actually had are what was existing. Now, one of the things I need to talk about is a lot of the times for your rates and your fees and charges, in various activities, you had a variance that said we could get anything between 50 to 70% from rates, and we can get between 30 and 50% from fees and charges. My recommendation to you is to actually set a fixed percentage for those different funding streams, because it's going to be so much easier to determine your real rates for the cost of the activity. We have enough evidence based on income from the last few years to help determine what that fixed charge should be. And in red, I have got what the revenue is for the past financial year, and my recommendation for what you should attribute to those particular types of income. Now, that's from the whole of the revenue stream, okay? So I'm saying 20% of your whole revenue stream should come from the UAGC, 30% from your general rate, and 50% from your fees and charges. And what we've got underneath there, for airports specifically, I'm sorry about the formatting screwing up on that version, but what we've got there is what the different fees and charges actually provide you. Now, you can tweak those. You can raise your parking fees if you wish. Your landing fees are your big income earner at the airport for your fees and charges. You are going to be extending the runway because larger planes are going to be landing there. It is absolutely feasible, if you choose to do so, you could charge a higher landing fee for larger planes. because you have to actually invest in CapEx to cover that in order for them to land. Your rentals and property leases, you can review those obviously annually. I tend to think that rentals or leases tend to only go up based on the CPI, unless you put in a substantial investment into refurbishing or renewing or replacing an asset. I don't know that you change your lease amounts so much. Bede, would you know?
Well, normally in a lot of commercial leases, there is a rent review clause, and well, others actually might know more than me about it, but there can be a number of drivers. I mean, CPI is one, but also the value, the capital value of the property is another, and what people seek to get as a yield or return can inform it. On some of our properties, and I know this, when we've negotiated, it has depended at times on the terms and conditions that we've provided, because at times council may wish to reserve the right to terminate a lease at shorter notice than normal, and therefore our rent will reflect that sort of a risk that the leaseholder would take. But the short answer is that some rents, the clauses I think we use on a regular basis may move in line with CPI, but I do think when we do our rent reviews, we get a value of the property and go back and look at what sort of yield we're expecting to get from it.
And particularly if you've made
Well, I
improvements.
should add, if you've got ones like community or social housing, of course, there are different drivers for those as well, as opposed to some of our other leases, if I call them that, in inverted commas, because some of the leases we have actually provide a significant benefit to council because we don't have to maintain the land, and others will maintain it for us.
So the question you have to ask yourself now is, when we look at the UAGC, do we think the airport justifiably provides a community-wide benefit at around 20% to the community? Are you comfortable with that level of income coming from the whole community for the airport? Then when you look at your general rate, is it of more valuable to people with larger land holdings? Fees and charges, that's really about the users. Are you comfortable with 50% coming from rates and 50% coming from the actual users of the service? And the floor is yours to actually discuss if you wish, or if you're happy, I can move on to the next activity.
What's the overall, is there lines missing that we can't see?
The bottom just talks about CapEx being, landing fees are $200,000. All the lines are there, it's just the format screwed up, sorry.
No, that's all right.
CapEx just talks about the UAGC helping to pay for any loans for CapEx out at the airport.
Are you wanting a guide today?
I'm just wanting to know, are you comfortable with it, with that as it is now, what we're proposing in red? First of all, are you comfortable with the principle that we go for a specified target rather than a wide range? And there's a number of reasons for that, because with a wide range, it kind of means that you also let yourself off the hook because you're not really committing to any one thing. It gives you flexibility that you can kind of move money around, but it reduces the transparency of exactly how much you're saying that activity is going to be rated for and exactly how much it's going to be on your fees and charges. In red is the income that you had, and that's kind of what I've used as the basis to look at those percentage parts. So are you comfortable with the principle, first and foremost, that we actually go for a target, or would you like to retain a range? And if you want to retain a range, you can do so, but my recommendation would B, stick to a 5% variance, because that is industry standard. If you have something that's like 10, 20, 30, and in some cases 40% variance, it's really hard to actually plan with real financial prudence in those cases.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree that we should be a bit more targeted. I think what would be interesting to know is how much we can increase those fees and charges, and I think it's probably relatively limited. So, these things might move over a period of time, but you're not going to be able to do it in a one-year cycle. And, some of those property leases, et cetera, are relatively low, but the opportunity is not probably there unless, we do further development, and it's, new CapEx and new leases, et cetera, and looking at that opportunity. So I think, I don't disagree. I think we're too wide. I think we should be more targeted, but it's probably going to be a creep rather than a massive change overnight.
And keeping in mind that because you have the airport extensions and the refurbishment and extending the actual airport lounge and all of those things, you've got improvements coming in this next 3 years. That could very well change the dynamic, particularly for the next LTP, that you play with those. You may increase your fees and charges more significantly then. The more users you have, the higher your income's going to be, obviously, and that's why you're actually putting in the investment into the CapEx.
It's all very high level, and this is one of the assets that we see as an offset, because it is one of the key contributors to our economic development. It brings people to town. It allows people to be upwardly mobile while living here in Timaru and what have you. Even though it is an international airport because it flies to Wellington and then it can go anywhere in the world. The fees and charges, if I'm understanding this correctly, that can be moved at any time, based on, and I get that. But it's very hard to know and understand that we are really where we should be with all our fees and charges regardless, because if we aren't, that comfort zone that you talked about, to be slightly flexible, and we take out the fact that we're not being slightly flexible but we're still being transparent, I think we need some comfort zone. But yeah, so you're asking us to vote on a principle across the whole thing. It's quite difficult. I think it needs to be, we'd need to actually look at them individually. I don't know if I've explained it.
We are going to look at them individually, but when you go and you look at other councils' revenue and finance policies, very few have a variance, and almost none of them have the variances as wide as you guys do. So tightening those variances would be highly recommended. But going for the targets, that's actually based on your current incomes and where your income is coming from. And it's like, if you're already getting 50% from your fees and charges, keep that as, okay, then we know we are going to rate the other 50%. And if you get more, you can adjust. And remember, you can adjust these at any time through an annual plan because it would be a variation. You can review your revenue and finance policy and adjust these if you feel the need to at any time.
Yeah, I just think we need more numbers, because this isn't telling us, if it's 495, is that half of the...
Sorry, say that again, sorry?
What is the total revenue for the airport? So it doesn't give us enough detail to make a decision. So
I can pull up a spreadsheet.
Yeah, so if you cut one...
After you come back from morning tea, I can pull up the spreadsheet that will tell you the total revenue, but it's basically... based on that, that's 500, 730, so $880,000 roughly. So those three red numbers are your revenue streams.
And the costs are?
A lot more.
So that's the problem, and we need that information, yeah.
Okay.
I think.
Oh, I 100% agree. Not enough detail to even warrant.
You guys will
But also-
actually have the breakdown of the budgets that give your, we're just not there yet with our financials.
No, exactly.
So,
But the thing is too, the airport's not just about moving people. There is multiple benefits of the airport, and that is incoming freight, outgoing freight. So it's not targeted to a particular group of people. The community benefits from
yeah.
the airport being there. So I think, you've got to be.
And there was, I believe there was a proposal for the airport a strategic plan to actually look at enhancing the freight abilities there. That was part of the reason for the whole rationale for the expansion. And in that case, you're going to get more from your leases from people who are actually having warehouses on your property. That will also help to pay for that. So there are different revenue streams that you're, like you've only got $1,500 in leases. If you're going to have major warehousing out there for freight, you're going to increase your lease income too.
I don't think is that strategy work all done as far as the airport, Andrew? The strategy work for the airport has anything, I know there was some discussions, but I don't think anything's.
Yes, well, we've got a meeting scheduled for at the airport, and then we'll be presenting a master plan for that, which shows that basically all the long-term projects that are planned.
I think also, Vince, I'm kind of struggling doing this in isolation, like everything. And I think going back to the table you put up at the front is we just need a little bit of time to go, okay, if we're going to go 50% at the airport, what is fair for the pool, what is fair for the library, and then look at them in whole. I'm just kind of struggling with going, is this right for the airport? I have no idea, because I need to look at it across everything.
I beg your pardon. Okay, so usually with revenue and finance policies, because this is the detail in your revenue and finance policy, so what I'm actually going to propose then is that for the rest of this presentation, which was basically just more slides of this, instead what I'll do is I'll pull up the spreadsheet. That has a lot of detail, but I haven't put analysis on the spreadsheet itself, but you guys will be able to see line items. If you're comfortable with that, why don't we'll pivot for that for the rest of this workshop. Would you be comfortable?
Then will you load a copy of everything up to the hub? 'Cause
Yes,
I kind of like to
absolutely.
go and digest it.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, what will happen will be a summary document of some of this discussion, and then also some guidance and some questions to help you guys, so that every activity, you can answer those questions to help you decide, and then we'll bring you guys back together so you can discuss it, because that's the critical thing. You answering questions individually, it's wonderful for me, but you all need to be talking to each other for consensus. So if you're happy with that, we will pivot. So what I would propose that we do, we have some savories cooking, and we're going to adjourn for morning tea, so you can go have a quick snack and a cup of tea, and I will pull up the spreadsheet, and we'll get started from there. How's that?
Vince, I just have a question from before. When you talked about all the different funding things, how do we actually fund debt repayment? Because it's not OPEX, and when you talked about what is how we fund capital expenditure, it didn't look like rates cover debt repayment, and if we can't use rates for debt repayment, how do we ever repay our debt?
We do use rates for debt repayment. It's usually through a UAGC. Is that
I can possibly help there, but so what we do is when we do our rates model, and water's a really good example because we went through it. So what we do is we actually build into that water charge a component that is interest and that is principal repayment over a period of time. And so when the NTU came around and they said, this was the debate, how much of our debt would they take? And I think it was about 80 or 90 million.
80 million.
80 million they were going to take of our notional debt. what it was we showed them, here are the projects that have been borrowed for, and here's the interest, here's the capital repayment, and so on. So we could show you, for instance, we could bring up like the airport, and you'll see in there's a line in the rate for, as an expense to be recovered. In the operating cost, there is an expense called interest, and we recover, and that drives how much rate and how much fee and charge we have to collect in order to recover that, along with, power and cleaning and maintenance and so on. So we do that. So ultimately it's paid via rates and fees and charges, the debt repayment. Does that help? Yep.
And I know that Vincie's just moved away from her microphone, but, and 100% on board with what the team's saying and the detail we need to look at, but this to me is still useful. So if this is still in a presentation format, I'd like a copy of it, because it does help to show general directions that things are already going, which is helpful when considering the detail.
Can arrange for that. Yep. Probably get it in a better format, might make it easier as well.
I just have another question about the other income. We kind of just whizzed over that, and it was a topic of conversation at the LGNZ conference that we went to, and how we can supercharge our other income. And so how do we as councillors get a good understanding of what assets we own, like what land we own, and what are the potential income streams off those assets? Because I feel like we're flying a bit blind there. And can we do something with those parcels of land or buildings? Is it solar panels? Is it billboards? Is it doing something else with the land we own to increase our other income stream? Because it seems like that's kind of one thing we do have control over.
Yeah, so we certainly can provide that. Most of our assets, and so if you look through our activity, most of the assets will show what assets are attributed to supporting the delivery of an activity. And so that's probably where you look to go, are there assets that can generate other revenue streams? For instance, what use can we make of all of our roading assets? Have we got roading assets that would be available for other income streams, such as, I don't know, I'll make something up here, leasing some, because some of the roading assets they're not all in the road corridor. Are they available? But the question you then run into, or the issue you run into, is quite a few of our assets are not able to have, we're not able to run a commercial activity from them. For instance, out of our roading activities, they are primarily for the delivery of an activity or service. But you're probably thinking about our land holdings. Are we utilising and maximising all of our land holdings? That is about going through and getting a picture of every single land holding and seeing what we're doing. And there again, we then have to classify it. For instance, reserves will often have a restriction about what we can or can't do on it. But we do have, on some pieces of land, we put up forestry and so on in order to defray the cost. But I think that's what you're looking at. And we tend to have to do that via looking at the assets that are supporting an activity and seeing which are fully utilised and which are in a way a surplus to that activity and just sitting there. An example was that land down in Rangi, which was recently disposed of to TDHL.
Yeah, we do try and generate alternative income streams, and a classic example there would probably be the farmers' car park. They pay for the naming rights of that car park. We own the building, but they pay us a fee per annum for that naming rights. So we do explore that. Airport, we've got advertising there. We've got rental car stalls and that. So wherever can, we will get additional revenue coming in. But roads, yes, unfortunately we can't lease roads. We can lease above and below, but we can't lease on the surface. Yeah.
There are, there will be dead stock. I mean, the likes of the old Chinese restaurant, the likes of that one, once we know that that is surplus, if it's not, earning any rental, obviously we should be looking to, potentially get rid of that. Another one that I think, and every time I walk past the 30 or 40 free campers sitting down at Caroline Bay yesterday, in one of the best spots in the world, where we should, in my view, be charging them $20 a night for the privilege. So if we have, I know it's not easy to charge and what have you, but, a simple kiosk, have the parking team first thing in the morning, go knock on the windows. Welcome to Timaru, you haven't paid your $20 parking fee. Yeah, overnight fee. I don't know, there's got to be ways to, to get revenue out of those premium spots. But it's a good discussion, so it'll take some time to do the analysis over the entire portfolio they run it.
Councillors, what I'll do is at the end of today, I'll make sure you have a full suite of all the information we've covered today, including the presentation where I've done the breakdown of the analysis and the recommendations with a full financial spreadsheet I'm about to go through with you.
Can you make sure that's on the hub? It's just easier if everything's in one place. It's easier to make notes in the hub.
Absolutely. I would welcome you to go have a cup of tea now while I set myself up. I'll probably have to sit over there in Boothie's
Couple of things. You might, when we were looking at those numbers, what you were seeing before, I think, was the 22-23 numbers Vinci was showing. What we're going, and we will upload those as well, but what we've produced in hard copy while we work on getting the numbers for the various operations up, or we'll print them out so that you can at least view them. Apologies for those who are live streaming, but all this information will go up, is that when we present the management reports to the Commercial and Strategy Committee, we present at an activity level. And within the labyrinth of council finances, there are many operations within those activities. And what you're seeing here is the airport operation, and I'll see if Mr. Dixon is available because he will be able to support you, but there is the second to last column on the right, budget FY is budget full year. And what that shows is the rates and charges, and then the user fees and charges, so you'll see 1.106412, those numbers will be GST exclusive. Andrea? Yes. Yep, so they're GST exclusive, and here are the various costs that go against that activity. So I think, Vinci, what you're going to be saying, and I'll get the various GMs for their activities to come in case you have specific questions, is at a conceptual level, you can see that the rates are sort of just over 50%, and the fees and the charges then make up the other sort of, I don't know, maybe 47, 48%, yep. And so your question is, what is, and I guess what we've heard is you want to see all of the operations, art gallery, museum, water, etc., so that you get an understanding and an appreciation of how those rates, those fees and charges fall. So it might be a bit of an iterative process, but what we can do is show you how these are at this level. Vinci, is there anything you'd like? And that shows you really where they fall. Now you'll see there is some detail. So to your point, Councillor Pye, about where do we repay, then in there should be some interest cost.
There is.
Yeah, interest expense 0470, and we're looking at a interest cost of 100 for this activity. Does that include the capital?
No, it's just the interest.
Just the interest.
The principal is paid through the
It is their principal.
depreciation.
Yep. So the principal's paid. Okay, thank you. Right. Vinci, is there anything?
Yeah, so, so the principal's paid through the depreciation, is that correct? So, because the question is, holistically we're taking that overall debt for council, but within specific business units, we are effectively, if this business unit has a loan, we are paying principal off this business unit loan, which will affect the overall debt. So what, yes, do you know what I mean? So although, yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So over time, within the business units, we are paying principal off to the council consolidated debt, if you like. No, totally, but it's that accuracy of recording, I think the question is being asked. So at any one time, in theory, we can say, well, actually the airport has loans of X, and another one has loans of X, and within KUI, they're all going up and down within their own activity. And that, because I think that's actually, I know that's a lot of information, but I think that's some of the understanding that the team would like. You're nodding, Michelle, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
What we would note is that this is taken from the management reports to 30 September. Yeah. Now, we haven't, we completed the annual report for 2023, so we do a roll. So these numbers haven't yet necessarily had a full interrogation, but the budgets should be correct, which is the number. So if there's some odd numbers in the actuals or those other columns, then we'd ask you to just be aware that we haven't yet gone and interrogated all of them. But to your point, Your Worship, yes, we should be able to go to any activity and say this activity has a loan of X, and when you total all of those up, we should be able to reconcile them to total borrowings.
Pull that. Yeah, can you pull that out to have principal line outside of the depreciation? So it's, what's that? I'm sorry, I'm getting the look, sorry. It'd be, not sure. No, that's fine.
I guess if we looked at the last long-term plan, you'll see that in 2031 was a figure of actually reducing the principal. So it took essentially 10 years of ins and outs, ups and downs, to get to the point where we had enough surplus to actually start reducing our total debt. So that was, like I say, 2031 in the old long-term plan. So depending on, I guess, how the 10 years looks, essentially there may be opportunity within the next 10 years to actually look to actually reduce principal as such. Yeah, so at the moment it sort of goes in and out.
New projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the benefit of knowing where it is business unit, it's the decision making then is based on activity as opposed to, which I think is quite healthy, although we know that we are going to get loaded into certain places, you know, with our debt. But I think it just gives more transparency for us and the public here. Yeah.
On this particular, oh, sorry, were you going to say?
It may actually show on the individual FIS statements once they're all put together and we know what their years look like, then essentially there is a line within the funding impact statement for each activity that actually any surplus, it will then show within those individual FIS statements.
Because, I mean, the airport's a good one. You know, hypothetically, if we do, you know, take some debt and we develop some, you know, some extra hangars or whatever it is out there, support, you know, increase, you know, rental, you know, making a decision based on that and not another activity. And we can say, well, actually, based on the revenue sitting in here, we can afford to take that specific debt because it's more of a commercial nature. Yeah. So, yeah.
I was just going to ask in relation to this particular activity, does the airport farm, because my understanding is that gets leased out, so is that in the fees and charges, or does that sit under property somewhere else, or where does that income sit?
The fees and charges includes all leases as well. So yes, the farm lease is included in that cost. It includes landing charges as well. And yeah, there's different ways of calculating landing charges too. So Air New Zealand has a commercial arrangement with us as opposed to private aircraft that pay per landing. And then there's also other leases within the terminal for the rental cars. We lease out car parks. So yeah, there's a lot of things in there.
Can I also ask, and forgive me if you've already told me, but these are obviously operational expenses. Where are the CapEx costs that we're looking at in the next few years?
On the other tab that's in the spreadsheet. Essentially, this data here is the basis of our monthly reporting. So essentially, in the monthly reporting, we have it at the high level, so the 10 individual activities. These ones here are the ones that go to the budget managers, so there's a lot more detail in those. So we're loading these individual ones up to the hub. And so then you can play to your heart's content. You can go and, if you've got a pet baby, well, you can go and have a look at that, see how that's performing individually. And on there's also a capital tab as well.
Yeah, that's, I like that. I think that's good for elected members to have pets. That might be of... Oh, no, that's good, yeah.
Well, councillors, this was supposed to be a principles-based discussion on the higher level, but we've kind of pivoted into more a budget workshop, but that is what you're asking for, so we're happy to go with that. So what I'm actually going to suggest, because we don't really have the breakdown of all of the fees and charges there, and what we can actually do is we will, as we're going through and printing off more of these sheets, we'll go through the activities. But I want you to think about fairness and equity and who the benefit is for. And if you're comfortable that you want to move more to a user pays or more for the rating, just in principle. Let's not discuss the numbers, just more the principles for each activity that, okay, yes, we think that this should be more, that the users are actually paying for it, or we think this is a benefit for the whole of the community, so maybe we need to actually look at how much is really coming from the UAGC versus a targeted rate or what have you. Keep it at the principal level. Is that okay? Would you be comfortable with that, sir?
Yeah, no, very much so. I like that, sir, too. I get called all sorts of things, so I'll take that one. No, look, I mean, I'm of the view, I mean, we're 50-50, what, 43 to 47, so we should be moving to that 50% and then over time, but it's going to, with an activity like this, it's going to be incremental, isn't it? And I'm a believer that it should be more user pays, but it's going to take, you know, it might take 3 to 6 years to get to a 60-40 or, you know, or longer to get to a, you know, 70-30 as an example. So it's going to be a longer term plan for this.
Yeah, it will take time. We can slowly ramp it up. You're doing a big jump isn't probably not practical. We have, of course, existing leases in place. We have annual negotiations when it comes to looking at landing charges, particularly with Air New Zealand. So, but yeah, and we've got to be very careful of the tension that we don't want to basically scare people away with high charges too.
Yeah, agree. But and a lot of businesses are guilty of it though. But there's a technical term for you all. But price creep is something that you need to keep, you know, occurring year on, you know, year out. Otherwise, you find that you're not even keeping up with inflation on some of those things. And you know, we've still got the cheapest parking, and you know, so we need to do price creep. It's hard though when you've got a $10 fee. And then, you know, if you're going to creep the price up, what do you go to? $10, $50 or $11 or, you know, so it's...
Certainly with the hangar leases, you know, they have been very low lease rates for many years, and we are slowly ramping those up now. No.
Okay, councillors, we had scheduled a budget workshop on the 5th of December, but to help us for the principles of today, why don't you identify for me the specific activities you want to discuss here and now, and we'll print those activities off because we won't have time to go through all 30. So give me your priority areas you want us to look at, and we will table that right now. We'll get the team to print what you want. We're looking at climate change as the next activity, but it's probably better that we tailor to what it is you're after, and we can print those specifically. I can't because it's all been taken down. I don't have control over that.
And
If you have it in front of you, that's great. So you know, like if you're really wanting to look at the three waters, are you wanting to look at roading? Are you wanting to look at the community facilities? Because then we won't waste time printing the things.
well, let's start with parks, and then maybe we go to Three Waters.
Parks?
Because
Okay.
we've got Andrew sitting in the hot seat too, so perfect. Don't go away, Andrew. No, I'm just having you.
Yeah, we can talk about parks. Parks, more than, forestry is very straightforward. It's 100% user pays. I would think parks or cemeteries. Cemeteries had a very wide variance between, like a 40% variance coming from the user pays, fees and charges thing, and I was suggesting we go more targeted.
Yeah, we don't want to get away from the purpose of today, which is around some indication on, what's that, sorry? Yeah, yeah.
On the half, the breakdown will be here, so you can click on the cemetery if you want the cemetery.
Yeah,
Oh, I have that one.
okay, yeah, do it at a high level, thanks, Andrew.
Okay. So what's being tabled now was climate and sustainability, which is 100% from rates at this point in time. But there you have the breakdown of the budget to date. There's not really a lot of discussion unless you, there's not much of a user pays component to this particular activity.
Is there much opportunity for central government funding in this workspace? Be asked.
I think it would be up to when the new government is established, what they actually open up, what funding, and I think it will be attached to specific programs or projects.
I could ask the group manager infrastructure, because we do get 50% of the waste levy available for initiatives. Do you want to talk a bit about that, Andrew?
With regard to parks.
No, climate and sustainability, because it's related rather than direct.
Yeah. You probably do, yeah, with this climate change.
Forgive us,
Yeah,
councillors.
there is some government funding around, and particularly around, but generally it's focused on regional initiatives rather than local initiatives, so. But Vincy might be able to help you.
For waste levy, that is very specific, that it has to be about waste minimization, which of course can contribute to your sustainability goals and carbon offsets if you're removing things like organic waste from any of the waste streams. So if we were to, for instance, look at some initiative about collecting food waste in the city center from businesses and hospitality type things, absolutely, you could get that funded through the waste levy, and that could absolutely be driven to help meet your overall objectives for the district to reduce the carbon footprint.
Because that waste levy funding was that going to, did you have a feeling that was going to increase over time? Yeah.
It will increase significantly because as the waste levy has been increasing, so will the return coming back to council, and you're projected to get somewhere close to about $900,000, I believe, in waste levy funding. That is only available for specific things tied to waste minimization, new initiatives out, so you can't use it for BAU.
At the moment, we use our waste levy for waste reduction initiatives, particularly around diversion, so a composting plant, we have used it for that. The gas flare is another area where we're reducing our emissions. So it's really, the waste levy is at the moment is really ring fenced around the waste activity.
Yeah, but that's
Transfer into the climate change activity at this stage.
But that's great use of the money, isn't it? So that's, okay, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's sort of more consequential or incidental, but for the last how many years has the waste levy been increasing $10 per tonne? So when we put our fees and charges up in the last annual plan by, was it whatever the amount was, $10 of that was increasing the waste levy, and it will happen again next year, and it's assuming the policy remains the same.
At the moment, it remains the same, but that could change with government. But we're up to $50 a tonne now for waste levies.
So is that automatic? We automatically get the money, or do we have to present projects again?
We get 50% of our waste
Yeah,
levy
we do
automatically
get
back, but we do have to, when we put in a return, we have to justify the expenditure around that, and if we can't justify that expenditure, then we've got to refund government, so.
Yeah.
But we haven't had to do that.
Point of clarification, though, you do get your waste levy funded tied to your population, which is why like areas in Christchurch and Auckland get millions and millions of dollars. And a proportion of the waste levy goes to regional projects, so that the Canterbury Waste Joint Committee actually approve out of a kitty that we contribute to, and a large percent of your waste levy funding also supports the Sustainable South Canterbury Trust and the Eco Centre. So now we actually have parks and cemeteries and forestry. So if we want to take a look, Your Worship, is it parks in specific that you actually wanted to look at more? Cemeteries, yes. Okay, so cemeteries had a variance of anywhere between 30 to 70% would come from fees and charges. We're actually looking to make that in principle a more targeted amount so you know exactly what to rate for. So as you can see there, there's a few rental and lease, oh, I'm looking at forestry, sorry. Nope. Okay, yep, that's great.
That's great. Lease, so I don't have to purchase it, but I can just lease.
Yeah.
Rent to own.
Yeah. Depends on how many bodies you want to put there, but yeah. So leases is not a high percentage of the income, obviously. It's the fees. And then other than that, it's really the rates. And of course, you have your UAGC because it is a service for the whole of the community. And then you have a proportion that is your general rates. Are you comfortable with the principle that it's a higher percentage of user pays? Okay, good.
Yeah. We're looking at here $320,000 fees and charges versus rates is, probably about 204,000, yeah.
Just to get an understanding, why did we have such wide variances in the past? You know, like I'm kind of supportive of moving to a more narrow range, but I want to understand why it was like that in the past, because I just hate disregarding what's happened in the past if it was there for a good reason. But 30 to 70% is quite a wide range.
I think really the maturing of the financial system has enabled us to be far more targeted about that, and that's what's developed over the last few years, is probably the reality. Because there was, for instance, if I just go back to the airport, because we've looked at that in broad order, there was an acceptance that there was some benefit to the community, and there's also a fee and a charge should be paid by the users directly. But it's basically it's the maturing of our financial systems that has enabled us, with better information, to actually start targeting this more precisely.
On the grounds maintenance budget for the cemetery, 225K, that's surely not just the mowing of the lawns and what have you. Is that what's happening in this year with those removal of the trees and the rest of it?
So the grounds maintenance, we still have to maintain the plots a lot, making them look tidy, so quite a labour intensive. And then the mowing. Unfortunately, a lot of the mowing actually between plots has to be done by hand. You can't get machines through there. So it is reasonably expensive to do that, and you've got to make a high level service for a cemetery as well. Plus the fact there's a lot of cemeteries. It's not, we're not talking just about Timaru here, we're talking about all the other cemeteries around the district. Yeah.
I was just discussing with the cemetery one, when you look at the expenses, and the burial expenses are 160, and depending on how you look at ground maintenance, but if the expense is directly related to the users per se, say 70% of the overall expenses, then surely the fees and charges should be 70. And I'm not saying they are, I'm just using an example there, and maybe we should look at the direct costs and try and have the income in the same proportion as what the costs are. Might be a good guide. Bit of subject.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. The fees and charges are generally around the purchase of the plot and the actual interment. So the ongoing maintenance thereafter is covered by rates and not fees and charges.
Your point there is probably a 10% change in that, isn't there? It'd be a 70-30 versus a 60-40, roughly. And some analysis, because I think we're still a relatively cheap plot, aren't we? As far as comparable to across the country. Goodness, the conversation's sort of going on a tangent. I'll admit that, but it'd be interesting to do some of that analysis, wouldn't it? Just to understand how far you can go.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the actual comparison, but I'm sure that we are probably very competitive, to be honest. We generally are in most aspects, but also noting that each cemetery has different fees and charges as well, depending on the level of services offered. Yeah.
They've just gone to get place, talking that one, and we'll be able to show you that in a moment. Get the waste. Yep. So you can see that. We're just looking to try and show, but we're showing there some of the fees and charges at a slightly more granular detail than was shown for the airport.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one thing what it does show is the detail that goes in and so on. And in actual fact, we can probably go even more, well, of course we can go down more granularly than in a more granular level, but it's one of the challenges, I suppose, as to what level do you want to see financial information that council produces, because we do produce at different levels and in different ways the financial information that then gets consolidated up. And if you think about it in the annual report, it's essentially consolidated into 4 lines of expenses: REM, depreciation, interest, or finance charges, and other costs. And while there's some elaboration of other costs in the notes, it's not much compared to this here.
Well, that's why I think this is good. I wouldn't want this every time we get a financial report at council, but it's good to have it so you know what makes up those headline costs that we're getting on a regular basis through council.
Yes, it is. I think it is interesting, isn't it, when you see that there's an amount set aside for memorial monument park maintenance, and the detail to which it goes is interesting, isn't it?
Oh, and I agree. It's probably one of the areas after doing 1 year that some areas are definitely need to be dived into deeper. Because receiving it 3 months after or at a standing committee is just not enough.
Continue to get, because there are some data nuts around the table that will eat this stuff up. Not looking at anyone at all. I'll put my head down. But because another set of eyes throws up opportunities for improvement, and that's what we're all invested in. Yeah.
We've talked about cemeteries, and forestry wasn't much. Did you talk about the user fees and stuff for parks? Parks itself, which is on the back of the page of cemeteries. If you flip it over.
Sorry, just to go back to the forestry, what kind of things are the user fees with the forestry? What kind of things are the user fees with the forestry? You've got user fees and charges as quite a percentage of the income. What is that?
There's leases for forestry blocks, and then you also have asset sales, which is just when you sell your trees.
All three. See that now, sorry, it was the total line I was looking at rather than the two lines above that show the lease and the sales, sorry.
Oh, sorry, no problem. I know that there's some interest around the Three Waters, but I need to alert you, like, under Three Waters, we have a number of schemes. Are you wanting to see the details for each scheme, or would you rather see the overview?
No, let's just have a look at, can we just do Timaru, just as an example?
Town, urban?
Yeah, no, urban, because that's the big conversation. Yeah, that would be.
Urban water, yep.
Postal, like, yeah.
Okay, that's great.
Just for, yeah, interesting. What is the level of challenge? And this is slightly off to the side too, because we're looking at the numbers, but what's the level of challenge that you put to a Tier 3 manager around managing their budget and getting good outcomes? Because, you know, are they incentivised to, it's a balance between delivering that level of service, isn't it? But also, you know, looking to find savings. And I'm not actually casting judgment at all. I'm just saying, well, hey, if there's a, you know, a consultancy budget or another budget, what's the incentive to, you know, get the best bang for bucks out of it? Or, and to the other side of it is, what's the incentive for them to not spend a maintenance budget when actually we want that, you know, within Kui spent if the maintenance is there to be done? Do you at a SLT level, you know, go through at that sort of detail with your, you know, managers around their budget lines, and are they achieving outcomes, if you like?
Yeah, our unit managers are acutely aware of the need to save money and also look at, you know, efficiencies and innovation. So during the asset management planning, they do a lot of work in that area and test different levels of service. And parks have done it, roading, waters are all doing it. So, you know, just seeing what you know, what you've got to be careful of is if you pull back on renewals, then you're probably going to have the reaction of increasing your maintenance or lowering the level of service. So it's about that. In some cases, they are going to be putting up proposals where the level of service is reducing in order to save that money. So yeah, there's a lot of there. And as far as monitoring budgets, I monitor them very, very closely. Yeah. Yeah. And I always test them on their expenditure. So yeah, I think, you know, we try our best basically to be as responsible as we can, but still we do recognise that we have a community to serve.
Yeah. One of the other, if you look here, quite a lot of a number of those costs, while we might call them variable, we don't have a lot of control over them. If you look at things like what we allocate in terms of, and while some of them are quite small, bank charges or insurance and so on then, and utilities, we don't necessarily control. We control other ones and can make a decision around them. But there isn't necessarily a lot, so in terms of the unit managers, some better budget managers than others, but one of the issues that we do grapple with is budget managers who, in order to meet budget, will defer maintenance or some of those discretionary costs, which can have a longer term implication.
Because, I mean, one of the key conversations I think we're going to be having this year is if you go to that urban water one, that urban water annual charge, which is 8.6 million, and then if you go down to that charge by consumption, that's generally going to be your commercial element, isn't it? So if you put a split in between those two, you've got 80% is urban households versus 20% commercial. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, basically, that's correct.
Yeah.
It's about the commercial, the water by consumption is only charging our large water users, so it's
Yes.
not generally all commercial or all industrial, for instance.
No, no, totally.
There's a lot of business, those sort of activity businesses out there that are still paying just the water rate.
The normal water rate.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
okay.
a commercial business and an industrial business is actually charged per pan as opposed to a residential property, which is
Yeah, such as our business, we
charged
pay per,
Yeah.
yeah,
per pan.
yeah.
And then schools have a separate formula again.
But that per pan, is that sitting in the charge by consumption?
Oh, sorry,
It
yeah,
will-
there's sewer, isn't it, per pan? So,
Yeah, it is,
so-
you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
So, yeah, so in industrial, some industrials that are not high water users are simply just charge the targeted rate.
Yeah, I mean, my question goes to the point that Councillor Booth has made over the years around that industrial water being relatively cheap, and if we're doing significant upgrades such as microfiltration, who ultimately gets the benefit? And if we were to have that conversation on, what percentage benefit lies with who based on, the actual charges now, it's an interesting conversation, isn't it? And there would be argument to say that one could be loaded more to support that business case, such as microfiltration. That's where I'm going. Yeah.
Yeah, the water charge at the moment, it did increase last year, or for this current financial year, it increased about 10%. It's currently around about 82 cents, I think, per cubic metre. It is relatively cheap, but having said that, it is recovering the costs related to that. Our water is cheap to produce, to be honest. It's a gravity system. It comes from our sources generally by gravity, and our treatment is fairly simple. We rely on very clear water. We just put ozone, and there's no filtration at this point. But as Worship correctly points out, with the microfiltration, there will need to revisit that cost, because that will add a lot more operational costs to the urban water activity.
And to your point, it is break even. So, I mean, the question on this would be, is that depreciation, do we have room for that depreciation number to be higher than what it currently is? Because if we are putting more cost in there, effectively we can forward fund some of these projects.
Yes, as you add, new capital, like a $30 million microfiltration plant, that will be depreciated over a number of years, and that depreciation charge will increase.
Yeah, no, I get that moving forward on new projects, but is that based on our revaluations? Because have we revalued water assets? We have, haven't we? Yeah, so that figure of 4.9 mil would still actually be low, wouldn't it? Or would it be?
4.9, that's what the revaluation.
That's the revaluation.
Remember, this is just urban water.
Yeah, no,
it's
totally.
Not entire water assets.
No, I get that. So that you think that's probably accurate then for depreciation sitting in there potentially, is it?
We would be reasonably confident in that figure, because it is one that audit spent a bit of time in determining what was the comfort they required in order for us to be correctly stating the value of depreciation. So it has had a bit of a look. As Mr Dixon points out, it's only the Timaru urban water assets, not the entire network, although there will be quite a bit of the network tied up in the Timaru asset.
Yes. But it doesn't include Downlands, for instance, which is quite a substantial asset.
but that's being funded within its own, within its own business unit, effectively Downlands anyway, isn't it? So
It is, that's
separate
correct.
in that regard, yeah.
Just wonder if you could give me a flavour of the overhead and internal recharges and how you come to those figures for each different unit, because I see, like waste is a cost and parks is a cost, yet the airport's actually a credit expense in there. And so do you kind of have a formula where you go, these different activities are going to pay this much to the overhead, and then what are the internal recharges? I don't need the detail, but just a bit high level so I get a little bit of an understanding.
Yeah, we do, and I'm looking around
For Andrea.
for Andrea because she knows a bit more detail. But the sort of thing we use is the space, the number of is it seats they term it, the FTEs, the number of seats we have for IT. Those sorts of factors go into what is the overhead that is charged back to the FTE, the number of computers they might use, the office space they require, and so on. So that it's those sort of drivers, but I could ask Andrea to give us the detail. And we do go through it, tend to look at it as part of the LTP actually. Did get a bit of a look at it, the last one. I'm trying to remember the detail.
Are vehicles, the fleet, is that sitting in there as well? Is the vehicle fleet for an activity like this, is that sitting in there as well? Or would that be picked up if you saw the overall water numbers? Because there's only vehicle expenses of 50.
Yeah, there are vehicles that are designated to particular activities, and it's an internal charge for the cost of those vehicles.
So that's in that, is that picked up in that figure then? The internal recharge? Yeah, yeah.
The principle is that our vehicle fleet is effectively self-funding by on-charging the various activities that use those vehicles.
Sorry, so the second part of that question was why would the airport have a credit in there? Andrew, I was just asking about the overheads and why some of them are costs, but in particular the airport, the overhead internal recharges is a credit. Probably rather than specific detail, I was just looking for an understanding of why some would be in credit versus most of them being costs.
We'll have to come back to you on that one.
Yeah, well, one explanation I might be able to offer is that sometimes if we over-recover on our fees and charges, then sometimes it's a balancing figure. Yeah. But probably Andrew needs to confirm.
I think we'd want to go and check our answer on that one. Back to you, Your Worship, on depreciation. I just had a look. I see that our water system overall had 6.66 million of depreciation out of the total of 34. So that 4.9 million does seem about right for the Timaru assets. And then because the other big ones are the sewage system at 5 million, stormwater network at 3.1, roads and footpaths 10.9, so bridges at 1.7 million. So those sort of, because that kind of total infrastructure was 29.2 million, it was sort of broadly made up. Those,
I mean,
but
those
they
funds,
do get pretty good,
pretty good. Obviously, we're spending all that money on renewals and what have you, but they're pretty good numbers, aren't they? So, I mean, I know of councils with zero depreciation.
I think that's a reflection also with the decision the council made to move to the valuations and with the reforms getting that all done has actually helped. So the depreciation is very well funded at the moment.
Got good visibility of what depreciation is for our particularly around our heavy activities like roading and the three waters is, I think, what would say, yeah.
Councillors, are there any more questions around the urban water activity? Because whilst we're printing off the sewer activity budget, why don't we look at waste minimization? Okay. So with the lease and rent fees received, there's a number of peppercorn leases on some of the waste assets to help support community groups. For instance, I think the Raptor Trust, and also the Sustainable South Canterbury Trust. And then there are rental agreements in place on various parts of Red Roof landfill and the Resource Recovery Park, and also at, I believe it is the Geraldine and Temuka. They have rental agreements there. Somebody does soil remediation, and I believe that there's another one in Geraldine that they also lease part of the property adjacent to the landfill that the council owns. So fire away your questions. Stacey, I know you have some.
Just on the professional services and this is more, slightly off topic again, but we've obviously done some work on have we done some cell development or something? Because in a couple of months we've spent most of our budget.
Yes, and that was actually anticipated for because we needed the cell to actually be open by Christmas.
No, totally.
Yeah.
And there'll be a heavy loading on that, but is that what it is? It's cell, development?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Sorry, I noticed that this one has a massive overhead recovery as income as well as a overheads internal recharges. So they two different things, or what is the difference between those two? Or is that a total I'm looking at once? No, it's not.
Councillor Pye, can we come back to you when we actually do some investigation into that one?
In education, is that through to the resources, that's through to the Eco Trust, yeah? The Sustainability Trust, the Eco Centre, is that right? The 70K.
Sorry. Yes, that's the one that actually comes from the waste levy funding, sir.
Oh, that's way, okay, yeah, cool.
I think just on that, Councillor Pye, we've separated our curbside collection from from Red Roof, and therefore what we do is recover through some of the, I think, through the fees and charges. If you look, there's corresponding debits, if you like, over in the expense side of the activities that have to be recovered.
Yeah, because curbside collection is a targeted rate, so it's based, so those who receive the service get charged the rate, whereas the landfill operations is a district-wide benefit, and so therefore is covered under general rate, so there needs to be a transfer between the two.
Yeah.
Are the sundry sales, for example, is that where the income collected from the likes of Temuka is shown? Where is that shown? Or is that shown under refuse fees to Marie?
That will also include your compost sales.
Yeah, okay.
Do you have any more questions around the waste activity at the moment?
What we were saying, that we recover because it's all, I think, that because it's all recovered via fees and charges, but there is an overhead, we show the overhead that we need to recover as part of the fee and the charge we have to collect. And that in order to pay our overhead, because all of that activity comes in from fees and charges. Pretty sure that would be the explanation. Pardon?
Go home and have a wee think about it
Yeah,
on
no,
my
well, I'll have a think too, but that I think is the explanation, because there is a transfer in there.
If we're ready, I believe you have the sewer sheet in front of you at the moment as well.
Sorry, one more waste one. The landfill aftercare, that would still be part of the contract though, is it? Or is it actually pulled out of the contract? It's a separate line item, but I assume it's part of the contract.
The landfill aftercare is a calculated item, cost that's based on the remaining life of the landfill and the overall expected cost. So it is, it's a charge that we have to do from audit requirement.
Right.
Yeah, it's basically putting away funding to look after it after it's closed.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So it's not a contract charge.
It's
no.
not a contract charge, so it's gotcha.
It's I guess a regulatory charge is the best way of describing it.
Yeah, so technically it is a reserve.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not cash that goes out like we're paying for the power. It's a provision in order to have money in the future.
Yeah. Bit like depreciation.
Yeah.
And please note, that's only for Red Ruth.
Well, we have got some costs. A place called Peel Forest, of course.
And the other
ones.
For your information, councillors, when I was speaking yesterday with John from Audit New Zealand, John Mackey, he did specify closed landfills will be one of his things that he wants to be looking at to see how we're progressing with the risk assessment under Andrew's team, and what provisions we'll be looking at in the LTP along those lines.
Yeah. Andrew, I know there's been some changes, but so employee costs, how many direct employees do we have in there now? Do we, in the waste space, sorry? Yeah, or does that employee cost, is that just our direct employees?
That's correct, it's just our employees. So basically the kiosk staff that used to be our employees are now employed by the contractor. Yeah.
To clarify, the professional services are for the use of like Tonkin and Taylor, who help us with like the gas flare services, and also Paddle Delamore Partners, who help with the stormwater management and closed landfill issues, so. Would you like to look at sewer, well, I mean, not look at it, but would you like to look at the budget at the moment?
I'm already knee-deep into the budget.
It's nice you got some contributions that you weren't expecting.
Andrew, on your employee cost for that one, is that, so there's the team out out there, but those employee costs obviously reflect some of the employees sitting here as well. As far as, because you've got consents officers and you've got quite a bit sitting in there, haven't you? So I think I've answered my own question.
The employee costs that are in,
Yeah,
or
no,
you're talking about wastewater budget, just sewer?
Yeah, I'm
budget?
talking about sewer, yeah.
Yeah, they're direct employees only. They
Yes.
don't include the
No,
staff here, so these are
I've
the
answered my
operators.
question. I was
effectively.
trying to think of the different roles. It's okay. At a different time, just for understanding of the organisation, it would be good to go through, and that's probably a good one because, as an example, but just, some of the internal roles that we have as far as, sitting within, so we've got direct people out at the plant, but you've also got other people inside in some of those roles that they're doing for explanation for the councillors to understand, what that activity actually encompasses as far as FTEs and why, because I think that would be quite informative. Did it have? Oh, it does, sorry, it does have the roles. No, sorry, you're right. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
yeah, as far as the employees that are in this office, I guess generally, and the ones who are doing the supervising the contracts, doing the designs and that, those costs are through the corporate overheads, the overhead charges. So
Yeah.
that's how their salaries are recovered.
Yeah.
Say, when you look at your funding overall at these big activities, you can see how much depreciation weighs into it, and this is why this funding of depreciation becomes such a critical issue, because in this case it's over 50% of the cost, and in water it was. Yeah, not quite, wasn't it? So between the two of them, water and wastewater depreciation is 50% of the total expense. Yes, well, I suppose, yeah.
You don't have that depreciation line, and you're trying to break even on a part of the business. Then it's where else do you get the funding from?
This is the advantage of, I guess, what you'd say, the advantage of accrual accounting over cash accounting, because cash accounting would just say you don't look at the depreciation, and that has been the challenge, which is why there's been underrating over a number of years, because now you're getting a full view of the accrual accounting and the long-term cost, because you are accounting for the actual value, the cost of renewal and replacement of these assets out over their life.
Can you remind me where we ended up with the review and insurance and how we were going to apply that across the business? Looking at, obviously it's more significant in some activities than others, but where did we land with that after we had the workshop? And is that going to come into play 2024, or what was the story? I don't remember.
What I recall was we were going to work on strategic insurance going forward, but there was a lot of work to be done on that, on how we might. So my understanding is it's still in play.
So it's still in play?
Yeah.
There is, because I think Councillor Shannon's, because it's a good point about getting a good understanding of what assets we want to insure, to what extent we want to self-insure, and so on. So it is a strategic view of as a part of the risk management of council's assets. So that work is ongoing, but we've got to go and do quite a lot of data analysis to actually understand what assets we've got and what we will insure, may not insure, or might self-insure. So. Yeah, it was discussed, was it at ARC, I think? Yeah, think the intention is that the review will be completed in time for you to take your insurance cover for 20, because we renew each financial year, to renew for the financial year beginning 1 July 2024. It's just over 6 or 7 months away. Yeah, it's the intention.
Sorry, councillors, is there anything else that you want to actually look at specifically, because we're getting down to the last 10 minutes?
Just actually, in that budget, should there not be a higher budget for professional services sitting within sewer, or is that? Is it? Yeah, it would probably, probably that's the answer, I'd say. That it's capitalised.
So, but sorry, you're asking about professional services line?
Yeah.
Well, in sewer, most of the professional services relate to capital projects.
Yeah,
So
it's
they're
yeah.
charged directly to the capital accounts.
Yeah,
There's very little operational. And, yeah.
Or we can use in-house resource.
Yeah, we do it.
For some of the services that we require as well with some of our existing engineers. Happy to put some numbers in.
Okay, councillors, well, what I'll do is we will get everything to you. Yes, it will go on the hub. What I'm going to do is relook at my PowerPoint that I prepared for you, adapt it to suit so that it matches the numbers in the projected budgets, and that I'll ask a couple of key questions. I have the one-page summary of the stuff around the revenue and financing policy. And we also have, what was asked was about the relationship between the activities at the operational level in the organization versus the activities in the LTP. So I have just a very quick one-pager to explain where they fit. And if there's nothing more, I will go ahead and close with the karakia.
Thanks, Vincy. And look, I hope, while it pivoted a bit, as they say, I hope you got some insight into what are some of the numbers that drive the activities, and we can go away and get some explanations on some of them for you. But would it also be helpful, because what we could do is show, for instance, the
Actuals.
we can try and show you the actuals for 22, 23 against it. Might take a bit of work. But would it also be helpful at a high level if you saw, here's the rates, like the airport is, was it 53 or something from rates, here are the fees and charges 47, and we did that activity by activity, more or less at a summarised level, so you can see for those activities what is collected in rates and what is collected in fees and charges, not on landing charges, leases or whatever, but just for this operation, here it is, and the same with waste, same with water. Here's what we get for these activities, or operations, I suppose. We get X in fees, we get Y in rates, and that makes up the total revenue. Would that be helpful? So you get that idea. Really the first page, but in a slightly more summarised form, is it?
Good to have
Well, I had that for every activity,
Yeah.
but the numbers I had used were actuals versus the projections, so we will correct that so that they're really reflective of the here and now. But also, I will bring it up more to the higher level because I did get into some of the detail.
think we could look at producing the split for the 22-23 because it will be useful, because that's the reality, and you'll see what was collected, because the rate we know, the rates are collected within a very small variance, like maybe what, Andrea, a couple of $100,000 or something maybe. So the rates are struck and we know what they are. It's the fees and charges that of course vary down at the Red Roof according to the tonnages. So what we could do is show you the fees, for 23-24 the actual in terms of rates, fees and charges, and then for 23-24 the annual plan, rates, fees and charges. So you get a bit of an idea, and that might help frame for you where you want to take fees and charges in terms of the long-term plan. Because as you can see, there's a number of levers that within the fees and charges that can be moved to produce the outcome you're seeking.
The other thing that I also had in there was what was in the existing revenue and finance policy around the funding split. So I will keep that in there so you have a frame of reference. And as the chief executive just said, there were variances in those. So, and I had my recommendations of what you should go for if you were going for a targeted one, and we will base that probably closer onto what's in the annual plan. But I will be looking to reduce variances.
Sorry, and that info on Hub's really good as far as being able to go into the CapEx just to see where variety of projects are, because it's, like stormwater, it's a good breakdown as far as where it's all sitting is across the network. As far as the information we're going to get for the long-term plan, that capital 10-year budget, we'll see it in this format effectively, won't we?
You'll be seeing it, and we're working on it today as we speak. And SLT will be reviewing it because, as I said, the first year having $150 million CapEx spend, when it comes to you, there'll be some recommendations of how that could be smoothed out or what have you. But my plan is to get it to you by the end of this week so that you can really read it before the 5th of December when we come with the budget. So with your permission, I'll say the ka kia. E tama nui te rā, whakaria ka kete koutuka, o korero, o whakaaro, o wanaka, ki te tuanui, o te raki e te nui nei, haome e, hui e, taiki e. Kia ora, councillors. Thank you for your time today and for your patience and flexibility. It was good we could pivot.